Quiet morning, the dim light coming through the gaps in the curtains, awakening my bedroom. The alarm clock rang at 6:15 as usual, exactly on time. I turned around and turned it off quickly, so as not to wake Sarah. She was always a light sleeper, and waking her up too early meant a cranky morning for both of us. In the quiet of the morning, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, where the faint streaks of light from outside drew straight, wavering lines. The house was as usual, the creaking of the floor, the sound of the heater running, creating peaceful morning music. But a strange feeling, an indescribable feeling, as if something was wrong. I went into the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and looked in the mirror. At 42 years old, my skin was no longer as smooth as before. Silver streaks had begun to appear on both sides of her temples. The lines around her eyes were getting deeper, even though Sarah always called them smile lines. But I knew that 8 years of single parenting had taken their toll. Every day, things got harder. I made Sarah breakfast. A peanut butter sandwich with banana, some carrot sticks, and her favorite little cookies. As I was packing the bag, I heard Sarah's door open, the soft sound of footsteps on the wooden floor making me smile. "Good morning, monkey," I said without turning around. "Good morning," Sarah mumbled, still half asleep, her mouth still tightly closed around the whiskers bunny that she had never left for so many years. Our morning conversation was the same as usual. I continued preparing, Sarah sitting there, her eyes misty as the light filtered in through the window. But today, there was something different in the air. "Do you miss the cookies?" I asked, chuckling. Sarah glanced at the bag I was packing, her sleepy eyes shining. "Sure. But don't forget about that time you forgot to bring your bread the other day," she replied, her voice emphatic as if the incident were still fresh in her memory. I laughed, but something strange flashed through my mind. For a brief moment, I felt as if someone was watching us. "Dad, is there anything strange out there?" Sarah asked suddenly, as she stood up to look out the window. I turned, following her gaze. The air outside was stranger than ever. A thick fog covered the entire neighborhood, stretching to the horizon. Everything seemed to be covered in a hazy white cloth. And I felt an eerie silence. There were no birdsongs, no wind, just an eerie stillness, as if the world had stopped. Sarah frowned. "It looks like something from a horror movie, doesn't it?" "It's just fog," I tried to reassure her, though I wasn't sure. I smiled slightly, but the strange feeling kept haunting me, unable to be dispelled. As we drove through the quiet streets, we headed towards the school. The fog got thicker and thicker, as if it was enveloping the entire town. An uneasy feeling rose within me, and I could feel the silence seeping into the space around me. Everything became slow and hazy, and I suddenly had the feeling that figures were hiding in the fog. But I tried not to pay attention. It was just my imagination. But Sarah sat in the back seat, softly asking, "Dad, why is this fog so strange? I feel like it's watching us." I looked through the rearview mirror, but saw nothing but thick fog all around. "The fog is just steam, honey. There's nothing to worry about." I smiled, but I couldn't shake the strange feeling. At school, I dropped Sarah off and watched her get in. We'd been through so many years together, but today, I felt something different. That unease was rising in me, as if there was something waiting ahead, something we couldn't yet recognize. I drove away, my heart heavy. The thick fog still hung over the town, showing no signs of lifting. And I felt something approaching. Everything had changed, but none of us realized it until it was too late. And then fear was no longer an option, it was survival. The morning was hazy, the air was gray, the weak sunlight filtered through the window, creating faint streaks of light on the ceiling. It was a morning like any other, nothing special, until the alarm clock rang, at 6:15 like every day, without a minute off. The peaceful feeling of the early morning was awakened by the soft ticking of the clock. Seen in the bedroom, Thomas, a single father, sighed, reached out to turn off the alarm. He turned around, glanced at the bed next to him. Sarah, his daughter, was still sleeping soundly. She was always a very light sleeper, and Thomas didn't want to wake Sarah up early, because every time she did, the morning would become a battle between father and daughter. He gently got up, left the bed, and walked into the bathroom. His face was bare, his hair was messy, but Thomas didn't care. He just wanted to quickly start a new day. Everything here was too familiar. The house was the same. There was only the sound of the heater running, the creaking of doors and floors, and the silence in the air. Kitchen scene. Sarah sitting at breakfast. Thomas walked into the kitchen and found Sarah already awake, sitting at the breakfast table, clutching her whisker stuffed rabbit, Sarah's favorite toy since she was 3 years old. She sat there, still sleepy, her mouth slightly pursed, her eyes staring blankly out the window, as if lost in nameless thoughts. "Good morning, monkey," Thomas smiled, opening the fridge to get Sarah's breakfast. Sarah raised her head, smiling. "Good morning. Dad, is there any good food today?" "Sure, monkey," Thomas said, glancing at the wall clock. "It's going to be a great day. Here, I made you peanut butter and banana sandwich. Do you like it?" Sarah nodded, but her expression was still a little thoughtful. She picked up the bread, but her eyes kept wandering out the window, as if sensing something strange outside. Scene transition, driving to school. In the car, Thomas drove Sarah to school. It was normal morning, but the farther they went, the heavier the air became. A thick fog covered the town, like dirty film covering everything. The houses, the roads, even the trees all looked blurry, as if they didn't belong to this world. Everything felt cold and hazy. "Dad, something feels strange," Sarah said, looking up at the window, her eyes wide. "I don't like this feeling." Thomas looked at his daughter. "Don't worry, it's just fog. It'll pass soon." But Thomas couldn't deny that there was a strange feeling rising in his heart. It felt like something was watching them. He couldn't explain it, but it was lingering in his mind. He sighed, trying to shake it off. School scene. When they arrived at school, Thomas parked the car and turned to Sarah. "Remember to do your homework and be home on time. I'll pick you up at Apat." Sarah got out of the car, still clutching the stuffed rabbit, and turned to look at her father. "You won't forget, right?" "Of course." "Have a good day, honey," Thomas smiled, but there was something unsettling in his heart. He watched Sarah's figure walk into the classroom, while the fog continued to cover everything around them. In the car, on the way to the factory. As he turned back to the road to the factory, Thomas couldn't help but feel the atmosphere getting heavier. The thick fog seemed to weigh heavily on his mind. There was something wrong with the air, as if something was lurking around them, waiting for the right moment to strike. It's fog, but barely does it feel like it's moving. Thomas wondered, glancing through the rearview mirror. The car radio played bits and pieces of news, but nothing helpful. The weather, the reduced visibility, and the explanations weren't enough to ease the growing feeling in Thomas' stomach. While Thomas tried to make sense of the strangeness of the morning, something deep inside him told him that things would never be the same again. The unsettling feeling kept rising, as if something was about to happen. The atmosphere of the factory. Factory scene. The steady hum of the machines, the dim neon lights on the ceiling, but Thomas couldn't concentrate on his work anymore. The feeling of not right kept lingering in his mind, as if something was weighing down on this space. The silhouettes of workers were still working, but the air today was different. It was no longer the familiar air of peaceful mornings at the factory. The fog outside was no longer just steam. It was special. It wasn't a natural phenomenon that Thomas had ever seen. Everything was hazy, as if there was a strange substance wrapping around the city, squeezing it into another world. He looked out the window, his eyes never leaving the thick fog, but all he saw was white. There was something in the air that felt like it was breathing, not the coldness of the fog, but a feeling of repression, as if an invisible creature was watching and waiting. He exhaled, trying to shake these thoughts from his mind. But he couldn't. That uneasiness kept clinging to him. It seemed like it was just waiting for an opportunity to explode. School scene. In the classroom. At school, Sarah sat at the window in the classroom, her eyes staring out. She felt something strange. Her classmates were no better. They were silent, not laughing, not talking. The whole class was immersed in a tense atmosphere. No one said anything, but everyone felt the unease. The teacher, Miss Russell, walked up to the window, her eyes filled with worry. She looked through the glass, saying nothing, but her expression could not hide the panic. She turned back to the classroom and ordered, "No one is going out at this time, kids. The teacher has announced that the fog is too thick, it's unsafe." Sarah looked out the window again. A light breeze blew eerily, but the fog didn't move. It just hung there, as if it was clinging to every corner of the town. The figures outside disappeared into the mist, making Sarah feel as if someone was watching her. She didn't know why, but inside her, an uncomfortable feeling began to rise. This feeling wasn't fear, but claustrophobia, as if the space around her was shrinking, enveloping her. Suddenly, an urgent message rang out on Sarah's phone, startling her. It was from her father. "You have to go home now, I'm on layaway. The school asked to pick up students early because the situation is not good. Stay in the classroom, don't go out." Sarah opened her eyes wide, looking at Miss Russell, but said nothing. That feeling still haunted her. She couldn't explain it, but something very strange was happening. Scene at the factory. In the factory security area. Back at the factory, Thomas felt tired. He walked past the security area, where Rita, the factory security guard, was sitting, staring intently at her phone screen. Rita usually chatted with people, but today she was strangely quiet. When Thomas approached, she looked up, her eyes were red, her gaze filled with anxiety. Rita, what's wrong? Thomas asked, his voice a little worried. The security guard didn't answer right away, but only gave him a worried look. Then, she said in a slightly trembling voice, in Riverside, a town nearby, they're experiencing similar situation. People are reporting strange feelings like they're being watched. The whole town feels like there's a strange disease spreading. People feel off. Strange phenomena like this are starting to appear. Thomas felt confused and his eyes suddenly became serious. What Rita said made him feel even more uneasy. He looked outside, his eyes on the fog that was covering the entire area. The feeling of insecurity had begun to appear clearly. The strangeness that Thomas felt was no longer just an invisible thought. It was present right in this space. Not good, Thomas said softly, but loud enough for Rita to hear. I have a feeling that we're facing something worse. Car scene on the way home. Thomas drove on the way back, the faint light of the street lamps cutting through the thick fog. A feeling of anxiety enveloped him. The feeling of unease did not leave his mind. He stepped on the gas, trying to get himself home as quickly as possible. He remembered Sarah, the urgent message he had just received from her. The alley above became dark, as if the world was slowly being covered in hazy darkness. The closer he got to home, the thicker the fog became, as if it was trying to swallow everything. Thomas could not understand why, but he felt that, once night fell, nothing would be the same. Factory scene. Thomas was standing on the factory floor, holding a wrench, his eyes focused on the machines. The space was still filled with the usual loud noise of machinery, but there was no denying that there was something very different. The fog was steadily thickening outside the window, swirling everything, making the air in the factory feel suffocating. Thomas suddenly received a call. He looked at the screen, it was the school. Hello. A woman's voice, a little urgent, came from the other end of the line. Thomas, right? This is Miss Russell. Your daughter, Sarah. She's in danger. She needs you to pick her up immediately. Don't leave her here any longer. Thomas' heart clenched. What's going on? He asked quickly. There's no time to explain, Miss Russell replied, her voice filled with worry. We've been notified, the authorities. The fog is thick and there's strange things going on. The school security is asking everyone to stay in their classrooms. We can't guarantee their safety anymore. Thomas had never heard Miss Russell's voice shake like that before. He didn't hesitate, hung up the phone, and rushed out of the factory. The feeling of anxiety inside him tightened, but he didn't have time to think. He had to go quickly, he had to get to school. Scene of cars on the road. Scene of blurred street. Thomas drove at a fast speed, but the streets were strange today. The fog was so thick that he could barely see anything but white. The other cars slowed down as well, as if everyone sensed something was wrong. Thomas' mind was spinning, his heart clenched as he thought of Sarah. The fog covered not only the land but everything. He saw blurry figures passing the car window, strange shapes that he could not recognize. At first they were vague figures like passers-by, then gradually, those figures seemed to become clearer, taller and more strange, as if they were moving in a way that was not human. A feeling of paralysis began to take over Thomas' mind. He could not control his emotions. The fog was so thick that he had to open the car window, but nothing changed. Everything just became more blurry. as if everything was sinking into a nightmare with no way out. Scene at school. Thomas arrived at school, but the school grounds were completely silent. Only the blurry figures of teachers and students moved vaguely through the fog. The calls, the light footsteps were not clearly heard. Everyone was enveloped in a feeling of panic and fear. Thomas rushed into the school, saw Miss Russell standing near at the window, her eyes full of concern looking at him. "Where's Sarah?" he asked immediately. "She's in class," Miss Russell replied, but there was a hint of confusion in her voice. Everyone was told to stay in the classroom. She wouldn't go out alone when she knew something was wrong. Thomas rushed into the classroom, saw Sarah sitting near at the window, holding her whiskers tightly. She looked scared, but she wasn't crying. She looked at her father, her eyes filled with worry. "Dad, something's wrong," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "I feel like someone's watching us." Thomas knelt down, holding his daughter close to him. "Daddy's here, there's nothing to be afraid of. We'll be home soon." Factory scene. Panic scene. As Thomas gets Sarah back to the car, the situation at the factory is no better. He receives an urgent call from Rita, the factory security guard. "Thomas, something's wrong," Rita's voice is shaky. "People are panicking. The alarm system has been activated. Strange figures are appearing outside, and it's not just fog. I can't explain it, everything is falling apart." "What? Rita, what's wrong?" Thomas demands. "We can't stay here much longer," Rita says, her voice ragged. All the phones are ringing, emergency alerts. Warnings about strange creatures. "I'm not sure if any of us are safe if we stay here. Things out there aren't what we think they are." Thomas' psychological scene. Car scene. As Thomas drove home, his mind reeling from the inexplicable events. He couldn't understand what was happening, but one thing he knew was for sure. He had to protect Sarah, not let her be lost in this world. "I've fought many times," Thomas whispered to himself, trying to calm himself. "This time too. I have to be stronger. I have to protect her." But what Thomas couldn't stop thinking about was what Rita had just said. Strange creatures. He couldn't get those thoughts out of his head. Car scene. As Thomas' car sped through the deserted streets, a numb feeling rose within him. The strange figures he had seen in the fog kept lingering in his mind. A loud noise came from behind the car, startling him. He didn't dare turn around. Heavy atmosphere in the house. The door was closed, the curtains were drawn. The whole house suddenly became eerily quiet, like a closed box. Thomas and Sarah sat on the floor, their eyes fixed on the door. They didn't dare to speak, didn't dare to do anything but listen to every little sound. In the quiet space, there was only the sound of their breathing and the strange sounds outside. Sometimes it was the whistling of the wind, sometimes it was the soft noise from the window, as if someone was standing right outside, just waiting for a chance to come in. Thomas gently held Sarah's hand, a feeling of anxiety weighing on him. Window scene. Outside, the thick fog still hadn't cleared, stretching all the way to the horizon. The alley had now turned gloomy gray. Blurry figures kept moving in the fog. They weren't people, nor were they animals. Strange, indistinct shapes, their presence could only be felt. They stood still, watching, as if observing Thomas and Sarah's every move, every gesture from the outside. Sarah crouched down, clutching the stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide. "Dad, are they watching us?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Thomas did not answer immediately. He just looked towards the window, where the shadowy figure still hovered, as if they were waiting for some signal to enter. Front door scene. Suddenly, a knock sounded on the door, loud and clear, making both father and daughter jump. The knock sounded like someone was pounding on the door, each knock getting louder, as if it was urging them to open the door. Sarah clung to Thomas, her eyes panicked, as if afraid that if she looked outside, those creatures would rush in immediately. "Dad, don't open the door. Don't let them in." Sarah sobbed, but Thomas felt as if something was pulling him towards the door. The feeling, inexplicable, was so strong that he couldn't resist. Strange sound scene. From the door, strange sounds began to drift in. Whispers, as if someone was trying to say something, but the tone was distorted and unidentifiable. Strange words kept repeating, as if a call from another world was echoing through the air. "Thomas, open the door, we need to come in." The voice, though unclear, was enough to send a chill down his spine. Sarah clung even tighter to her father, screaming, "Dad, don't listen. It's not anyone. It's just them." Thomas looked at Sarah, his eyes bewildered. The whole house was enveloped in a numbness, a feeling that was hard to describe, impossible to explain. The sounds outside the door continued. Each whisper seemed to push him closer to opening the door. Scene outside the door. Attack of the creatures. Suddenly, a blurry figure appeared in front of the window. Thomas quickly turned to look, but when he got a better look, the figure had disappeared. Then it appeared again, closer. But this time, there was more than one. Strange figures were gradually appearing, floating in the mist, as if they were slowly entering the house, even though no one was opening the door. The numbness in Thomas' heart began to rise. He felt like he was trapped in a trap where every decision he made could lead to death. Every step, every action was influenced by some invisible force. They could not enter the house unless he invited them in. Knocking and strange sounds. Again, the knocking sounded, this time louder and more urgent. "Open the door. We need to come in." The voice was clear now, carrying a cold, menacing tone. Thomas felt as if something was forcing him to open the door. His entire body felt heavy, unable to move. He tried to block out the voices, but they echoed in his head, unable to be pushed away. It felt as if something was cutting off all contact with the outside world, forcing him to face the darkness. Thomas' head. Inner dialogue. In the quiet moment, Thomas suddenly realized something he had never thought of before. These creatures could not enter the house unless invited. And that was the fear they were exploiting. Every call, every fake sound was meant to catch them off guard, to scare them into opening the door to them. "I won't let them in, will I?" Sarah asked suddenly, her voice trembling. "That's right," Thomas said, but inside he was uncertain. He knew that if he didn't do anything, things would continue like this, and he didn't know what to do to protect Sarah. Knocking and tension. Strange motion. The knocking came again, not once but 3 times in a row, strong and urgent. The door seemed about to be pushed out of its frame. Outside, the strange figures began to move closer, becoming clearer and clearer. A distant rumble broke the silence. Thomas was holding Sarah tightly, his eyes fixed on the window. The house was still shrouded in the darkness of the fog, but this time, it seemed eerily silent. There was only the breathing of the father and daughter, the chirping of insects outside the window, and the quiet sounds of figures outside. Suddenly, a powerful light cut through the fog, and in the blink of an eye, a large army appeared. Military vehicles slowly drove through the street, their headlights shining directly on the strange figures standing silently in the fog. The rumbling of engines and the wailing of sirens served as a reminder that rescue had arrived. Thomas breathed a sigh of relief, but in his heart, an uneasy feeling still weighed heavily. Was this truly salvation? Or was it all just a drama to soften the truth that no one wanted to face? Interior scene: Army enters. Outside, the army had set up a perimeter around the area. Armored vehicles, soldiers carrying special equipment to deal with the fog. They used gas sprayers to reduce the effects of the thick fog, and ultrasonic devices to detect creatures. Everything was done quickly and professionally. "Thomas!" A voice rang out from the door, making him turn around. A military officer walked in, his face showing tension, but his eyes were filled with determination. "We have to get you and your daughter out of this area immediately. Come with us, quickly." Thomas did not hesitate. He grabbed Sarah's hand tightly, pulling her along with the officer, along the corridors of the house. But when they got outside, the air seemed to be getting heavier. Even though the army had used equipment to reduce the fog, a strange chill still covered everything. Moving to the safe area. Safe area scene. They were taken to a safe area controlled by the military. Tents were set up, fences were surrounded by fully equipped soldiers. Equipment was arranged around, helping to protect the area from the intrusion of strange creatures. Thomas looked around, the feeling of anxiety did not disappear. Sarah was still holding his hand tightly, her eyes anxiously looking towards the military, but she did not say anything. An officer approached and announced, "The situation outside is not completely under control. Those creatures are not just ghosts. They can come back at any time." Both Thomas and Sarah were stunned. "They can come back?" Thomas asked, his voice filled with doubt. "Yes," the officer replied, "we can't be sure if we've killed them all yet. They have the ability to resurrect themselves from our own fear. The only thing we can do is wait." Thomas looks back at the events that have passed. Thomas' contemplation. Thomas sits down in a chair in a makeshift tent, his eyes looking through the tent door, where darkness and fog still linger outside. The chill comes not only from the air but also from the memories of what happened. He remembers the tense hours of facing strange alien entities, the ghostly knocks on the door, the strange whispers. Flashback. "Dad, you can't open the door, can you?" Sarah asked him at that moment while they both stood at the door, looking through the window, where strange figures were moving outside. "No, honey," Thomas remembered saying. "I won't open the door." What had he done to protect her, to make sure his daughter didn't face death? No, he had done the right thing. But now, looking back, he wondered if it was fear that had gotten them into this situation. They had let fear override their every decision. The lights were still on, but the light couldn't dispel the anxiety in Thomas' heart. Was this really salvation? The creatures weren't just ghosts. They attacked not just with sight, but with sound, with the fear they instilled in each person's mind. New life awaited them. Thomas held Sarah's hand, looking into her eyes, while outside, the army continued to prepare for what might happen next. Their lives would never be the same. They had to live in a new world, full of fear and uncertainty. But Thomas knew that with Sarah at his side, he would dearly to rebuild new life for his daughter. "I will never let you be afraid again, Sarah. We will get through this," Thomas said, his voice filled with determination. Sarah looked at her father, her eyes shining, and nodded slightly. "I believe in you, Dad." Thomas smiled slightly, but in his heart, a question kept ringing. Can this world go back to normal? Can we live in a world without fear? The war did not end here. These creatures may have temporarily retreated, but would they return? Would fear continue to haunt them?